Late last night, I was able to interview Vem Miller, the man accused of threatening to assassinate former President Donald Trump in Coachella, California. He's going to walk you through all of the details, how the police railroaded him, tried to trick him, spread false stories about him. Is this to get elected as future governor? Was this a giant misunderstanding? Was this targeting for putting out documentaries that expose the federal government? I'm going to let you decide, but this is an incredible interview, and I recommend that you watch it. Let's get on to the interview. Today, I'm going to be helping you understand one of the biggest mix-ups in American history where somebody was accused of a heinous crime. To help me go through all that, I have Vem Miller. Vem, thank you so much for joining me.
Stephen, thank you so much for inviting me onto your show.
Let me give my audience some background, and then I want to jump right in on your story. So Vem Miller is a documentary filmmaker, an America-loving patriot. He is the founder of America Happens Network that has incredible documentaries, insight into government corruption. He's also the person that was falsely accused of wanting to harm former President Donald Trump in Coachella, California. He's here today to tell the truth and his side of the story. Thank you so much again for joining me.
Thank you, Stephen. I mean, just you saying falsely accused is like, man, I literally got chills across my body because for the last 4 days, this has been like the Everest I've had to climb, and getting on as many shows as possible, telling this true story about what happened, showing evidence. And it seems as though, I mean, I started to see the tide turning. Well, the lawsuit against the sheriff and his department, the county, was filed basically not yesterday, the day before, end of day. And then I started getting interviews for that. And it seems as though, like, it was almost as if halfway through the day, I started feeling as though, people were now asking me the right questions, not looking at me as a potential assassin. This whole thing's bananas because, America Happens has a long history dating back to the early 2000s. And to be very frank with you, I mean, it started off as a reaction, I think, to the conduct of George W. Bush, which, I'm a conservative now. I've been a conservative for the last 8.5 years because that's where I started researching what it really means. I think I was just one of those uninformed voters before then, growing up in Hollywood. There was a few elements. I certainly didn't like that administration I just referenced and what they had done with infringement upon our rights. And, I'm all about the Constitution, and I try not to be about political party. I try to be really about the Constitution and really protecting our freedoms, especially freedom of press, freedom of speech, our Second Amendment rights. So thank you for, introducing me as, somebody who had false accusations thrust upon him. Some crazy things happen, because also, America Happens relaunching it is really inspired by Donald Trump and true conservative values, I think, and true protection of our Constitution. And while it's not like all of our contents like supporting of Trump and his policies, but I would say like 95% of it is, and we've done like 800 episodes. So to be accused of trying to assassinate Donald Trump was just like the most bizarre thing, Really, what happened was what I do every time I go to a Trump event, and the distinction I should be making here is that a Trump rally and the parking lot to a Trump rally are two wholly separate locations, right? And the reason they do this is because the threat of assassination and or terrorism, any kind of evil deed like that is really not only just like a bullet and a gun, but it's also car bombs and things like that. So there's a separation. So having been an insider and seeing the geography, how this works, and talking to security members, in my mind, it's not that I'm going to a Trump rally. In my mind, I'm going to a parking lot to park my car in a private parking lot, get out of the car and walk at least a quarter of a mile to a mile distance, which is a separation that is necessary in order to prevent things like car bombs and other terroristic acts. And so even in that act, it's like I was never wanting to take my guns into anywhere near a Trump rally. And so what I do, basically what I do, and I've done in Nevada every single time I've gone to a rally, which is that when I'm pulling up to the parking lot, if I see a police officer, I inform them that there's guns in the car. And by the way, these guns are not also, I mean, I'm not an expert at guns, but these guns would be like really a bad idea if anybody's thinking something nefarious. One of them is an unloaded shotgun, and one was a loaded Glock, both in the back of the trunk in a lawful region of the trunk. And so, you know, it's not the tools for that sort of evil deed. I do what I do with when I go to every single Trump rally. You know, just by virtue of being a gun owner, I have my guns in the trunk in a lawful area. It's not next to me. I mean, there was some people saying, "Oh, he had it right next to him and it was loaded." No, no, these were in the trunk region, right? Um, and so, and by the way, there's, you know, discrepancies between California and Nevada law. I think I've you know, been pretty clear on past media events that essentially in Nevada you're allowed to have 14 bullets in your gun. In California, it's capped at 10, right? The last thing I want is somebody roaming around my guns, my serial numbers, doing ill deeds. You know, so, and it's also like just being respectful with the police, which I found when in 2022, actually having come from LA, where I grew up not very respectful of the police because there was so much corruption. When I ran for office in 2022, I noticed in Nevada, I really enjoyed speaking with the police officers, and they were very politically astute, asking the right kind of questions, displaying like intelligence, and being very, you know, being just curious about policies that they hold dear, and it's usually the same policies that I hold dear, which are constitutional values, freedoms, you know, gun rights. And so I do exactly what I've done all the time, which is I go as I'm driving in, and I haven't even entered the parking lot area. I see the parking lot area is in front of me, and so I see a police officer with a sheriff's vest on, and so I pull over and I say, "Hey, you know, officer, just letting you know out of common courtesy that I have two weapons in the back of the truck, and I'm just going to leave them in my car when I park it, but just letting you know." And I could tell from the look of this guy's face that it was a little bit of a different look than what I'm used to. And so then my next thing became that, okay, like I'm seeing, you know, this kind of concern on his face. And so I say, you know, if you want, I could leave these guns in the back of one of your police cars and just pick it up on my way out if you're concerned. Again, you know, concern, look on his face. So then at this point, I say, I could also do a U-turn and just go, because if it's something of concern here, then, you know, and that's when the California distinction, I'm like, oh, okay, wait a minute. I've done this in Nevada. We're in California then. So that, you know, but what happens at this point is the police officer tells me to pull over to the left side where there's a dead end. Another police officer comes and basically says, "Get out of your car, sir." I get out of the car. He says, "Turn around," and then he handcuffs me. And I say, "Sir, why are you handcuffing me?" He says, "Because it's for my safety and protection." And so that's really where the ordeal began. There was a lot of things that happened following that were very, I think, deprivation of rights would be the right terminology, because I kept asking for a number of things. I kept asking for my one phone call. And just for the record, I never got my one phone call. Throughout this entire 10 hours, I was not allowed my one phone call. And this is by the deputy that actually made a verbal statement that then ended up in the press, that I had said verbatim that I am here to, I won't even say the whole sentence, but to KILL Prez Orange Men. So I was at this point, you know, I did not know obviously that was going to happen, but just to give you an idea of what kind of deputy we're talking about, and he was the arresting officer as well. So at what, you know, they throw me in the back of a police car, and to be very frank with you, my blood sugar wasn't doing well at that point. I was not feeling well at all. They put me in a car that's like a sauna, probably 110 degrees. I'm sweating. I'm having heart palpitations. I'm trying to even get their attention because the door's closed now. And for anybody that's been in the back of a police car, it's not like, you know, you could just kind of, at this point, my hands are in the back. So you can't, it's not like you could just hit and get their attention. There's like, different layers of stuff and plexiglass. And so I eventually, once I start feeling like I'm gonna faint, or honestly, I was like, I might even have a heart attack right now because my heart's racing and I'm sweating. And, at this point, I start kicking the door, and we're talking about like an hour into this nightmare. And just to get their attention, finally I get their attention. I ask for my water because in my water, I have a couple of supplements that help to regulate my sugar, but also help to regulate my heart rate. And for the record, I try to do natural supplements. Anybody that's watched my Blood Money podcast or seen the America Happens Network at americahappens.com knows that that's one of the categories that we're very passionate about, like medicine 2.0, some of the things that people like Dr. Peter McCullough, Dr. Joe Newsman, the 30, 40 something other expert doctors really profess to, help. And by the way, I got to throw this out there as a side note. I've been following these regimens from these doctors that I met because of COVID. And recently I went to get my eye tested and found out that my eyesight had improved 45%, believe it or not. And the optometrist was baffled. So I swear by this stuff. This stuff has done incredible things to my health. Now everybody knows I'm 49 years old. I certainly don't feel like I'm 49 years old, other than certain things where I got to monitor my blood sugar, and probably not get arrested and thrown into the sauna. And so at this point, the arresting officer comes up to me and says, "Sir, the only thing we're concerned about is that your firearms are lawfully registered, all right?" And he's like, "All we want to do is basically see the serials and run a check on it." They use that as the predicate to essentially going into my car. And frankly, it was not the truth. And what was really the truth is that once I gave them the okay and I said, fine, you could, get the firearms, I told them the location of the firearms. They went into my car and ransacked the entire thing. And I'm talking about bomb sniffing dogs going through my clothing, going through my medication. And I take 30 supplements a day with these like little Ziploc bags when I'm traveling, and they're just ransacking the entire thing, right? Swap testing my muffler, swap testing the under the hood of the car. I mean, they were looking for something, and lo and behold, they find nothing whatsoever. But at the same time, they're refusing to give me my water that's going to help me because they're insinuating that there's some kind of like cyanide or something in there. Like, what if it does something to you? I mean, they didn't say cyanide, but it was very clear that, they were onto this theory of, and probably because of the deputy. If the deputy's going around saying things like, he's here to, X the president, then perhaps these guys think I'm a nut job, and they're worried that I'm gonna Joseph Goebbels myself, or whatever those Nazis did with taking cyanide pills and stuff. So at this point, I'm feeling very weak. Luckily, there was one cop kind enough to just give me regular water, which was a little helpful, although I needed my supplements. And, just for the record, eventually they allowed me to have the supplements, but it seemed like about 2.5, 3 hours later. And at this point, I'm assuming that enough research was done on who I am, where they felt as though it was safe enough to, suggest that, this guy's not going to off himself with some cyanide that he has in his water, And therefore, as this story arc goes, I start feeling well at one point, and the savage starts coming out of me because I studied law, and I know certain terminologies when deprivation of rights are happening, when things are happening under the color of law, right? So, I'm after 3.5 hours approximately, and by the way, I had to pee really bad when I arrived there at 3 p.m., and that was absolutely excruciating. It's the first time in my life that I've just thought to myself, you know what, I might just pee in my pants. And just in the car. And frankly, I was so upset at that point that I'm just like, you know what, like, whatever. It's like, let him clean it up. You know what I mean? It didn't go that way though. Eventually, 3.5 hours later, he takes me somewhere, and it's just very odd. He's standing right over me as I'm peeing. And then, he puts me back in the car. He takes me to an RV where the Secret Service and the FBI are stationed. And I see this arresting officer go outside the RV, and I'm looking through that mesh thing in the back of as I'm sitting in the back. And I could see 5 to 6 Secret Service and FBI. And I could see this deputy pitching his story to these individuals. And I could also see the look on their face is kind of very, like, almost like they're realizing it's a nothing burger. They're not buying it, right? They weren't like jumping on this thing thinking that they just caught like Lee Harvey Oswald or something, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
And so well, before we got there, he told me I'm taking to get interrogated by the FBI, and that's why we had gone to the RV. And so then he comes back into the car and he says, well, they're going to interview you at the police station. So that was the first time that I saw the feds and Secret Service really decline to interview me. Like, that was very clear in that moment. After 25 minutes or so that this guy spent telling him whatever story he said, right? So at this point, he takes me to the police station, and we're in this big room where all the police computer stations are set up on one side. There's a 6 foot tall piece of glass separating the holding area where I'm essentially chained to a bench by foot and still handcuffed, right? And so at this point, as I was saying, savage mode started coming out of me. Because they gave me my water. This was about 2.5 hours, maybe 3 hours in. It takes a moment for it to kick in, and now I'm just kind of back to regular and hungry, by the way. And I'm just like pissed off because I now it's clear what's going on. Because for the viewers out there, I understand the concept of if somebody seems like a threat. I'm happy they were that thorough in the beginning, but it's the subsequent things that happen that, without evidence, things were said that have had dramatically damaging effects to my life that are what I think was a lot of wrongdoing there. So,
Let me ask you one question. Do you think this original deputy telling this lie about your alleged intent to hurt Donald Trump colored the vision of everyone else that interacted with you the rest of the day?
Oh yeah, potentially. So he was the fulcrum between like me and them and everybody. He was the one liaising. He was the one setting the information. I do also think that we've come up with 4 theories, two that are probably more conspiracy oriented, two that are much more based upon narcissism and self-interest, including the sheriff that has political aspirations, including that Coachella is not a regular location for a Trump rally, including the opportunity, if an event happened, for the sheriff to raise his profile via mainstream media to a large audience in order to be somebody that's going to get a lot of support running for governor or whatever that sheriff's intentions are. So essentially, I'm in this holding area, and at this point, I see the penal code on the wall. I think it was like 851 or something, and it clearly says that anybody that's brought in here has the right to a phone call immediately upon request. That was a phrase, immediately upon request. So I stand up, I tell this arresting officer that literally read it, and I say, I want my phone call. I want my phone call. And he doesn't give me my phone call. At this point, there's something called the blue wall of silence that I'm very well aware of because I've interviewed a lot of former and current police officers. And the other police officers are ignoring it too. And I start telling them, listen, and this is when, again, I'm in savage mode now. I'm like, listen, that deputy is going to get fired. I guarantee you that, because I already knew like this guy, couldn't stand the chance of surviving this once investigations happen. It's like at this point, I'm astute enough to understand that this guy's doing a lot of bad things that led to it. He's not been an honest camper. So I tell the other police, I say, look, I know, you guys are having the back of your boy there, but just know that I'm here asking you guys for my one phone call, and I'm being denied that. That is what is due to me by law, and you guys might also get into trouble, right? They ignore me. And again, multiple times during this period, I ask. About an hour in, one Secret Service agent and one federal officer come into the station. They go with the deputy sheriff into a room for about, I'd say, 20, 25 minutes. And I haven't had to watch this entire time, by the way, so these are all approximations, but the security cameras will certainly reflect everything that I'm saying to be 100% true and accurate. They go into the room. Then they come back out, and one of the agents asks me, "Sir, do you mind if we ask you some questions?" And I see this as an opportunity to get my one phone call. So I say, I will answer whatever you guys want, but let's do it like this, right? Why don't I do my one phone call? And you guys could literally sit next to me and listen to the entire thing. So I don't have to repeat the same story twice. And having done a lot of these interviews, to tell the story in detail with play by play, it takes usually between 45 minutes to an hour. And it's traumatic to say. I mean, it's no more traumatic, but certainly in that moment it was very traumatic. Now I've said it like multiple times and it's kind of pretty easy. So basically, I offer that to the agents. They look at the arresting officer and they go again into this private room. 10, 15 minutes later, they come out of the private room and, sorry, I should correct that. 10, 15 minutes later, arresting officer comes out of the private room without the Secret Service and feds. He walks up to me, he says, well, they don't want to interview you. They left. I said, what do you mean they left? And I was actually kind of bummed out because I was looking at those guys as being of a higher, I don't know, quality perhaps is the right word, in terms of, maybe once they heard my story, they might turn to this guy and maybe in private say, hey, you're barking up the wrong tree. You shouldn't waste your time with this. This could get you into trouble. That's what I was hoping because I realized the intentions of this deputy and how he was coming at me. And by the way, one other detail I totally forgot to say is while we're at the Coachella location, I overhear him speaking to a female officer making derogatory remarks about Trump folks. And so I kind of now I'm thinking, okay, this guy is like, there's a little bit of a perhaps is a leftist, perhaps, he just doesn't like Trump and Trump people. And I realized that there could be an agenda right there. And so at this point, he takes me to the detention center. I'm handcuffed by feet as well, like those chains where you could only take small steps. They take me into a room where I'm supposed to get some kind of health checkup, like blood pressure and all that. And at this point, I'm like, I don't consent to anything. I don't consent to anything. I don't consent to anything. And I'm very clear that I'm not consenting to anything. I get out of that health checkup room, that go to the check-in area. And essentially next I'm taken into an x-ray, which by the way, they did not tell me it's an x-ray. They told me to stand on top of this thing. And then I just hear this sound and I'm like, what just happened? They're like, well, we x-rayed you to make sure that you're not hiding, I guess weapons in crevices. So basically, yeah. So at this point, they get me fingerprinted. They take my mug shot. They take me into a cell, and in the cell, there's a phone on the wall. I attempt to make two phone calls. Both of them fail because the phone's not working. In fact, one of the individuals that tried to answer the phone is willing to go on the record saying that I tried calling, but he couldn't hear anything. I go to this buzzer on the wall and I press it, thinking that this is the head, the desk of the detention center. I'm thinking maybe they could give me another cell with a working phone. They don't respond at all. And so I spent till about, I'd say approximately, this was between 8:30 to 1:30. This is going on. They bring some crazy lunatic that about 20, 30 minutes in, that's a few cells down, that's basically just hitting the walls, yelling like a maniac, like straight out of that movie Midnight Express, where you're like put in with like insane people, right? And frankly, I realized how hard it is without a pen, without a notepad, without anything of creative substance, being inside this asylum-like space. And then I'm like, if they put me here, I get why people get all yoked up and jail because that's the only thing you could do, like sit-ups and push-ups. Then a gentleman is brought in that looks like MS-13, and he's obviously had more experience at this than I do. And he's put across me, and I could see through the window, and he's like, he takes off his shirt, he starts shadow boxing and doing push-ups, sit-ups, all that stuff. So I literally start doing push-ups and sit-ups just so, I could kind of pass the time. And I'm like pacing around there and all that. Anyway, cutting a long story short, it was very odd to be in that kind of a situation as a director producer that's never been ever criminally even accused of anything. Eventually they allow me to leave at around between 1 and 1:30. All they did is they gave me a ticket with 2 misdemeanor citations. There was no bail whatsoever, which has been what's been reported, and in fact I've heard people are finding on the website. But I challenge the sheriff's department to provide any evidence that I paid 1 penny to get out, which I did. I did not pay 1 single penny. And so essentially at this point, I'm just walking on the streets trying to find first food. I order an Uber. I get food from, well, calling it food would be an overstatement. Beef jerky and water from a 7-Eleven. I go to the tow truck place. It's closed because I just wanted to see my car, get some medication out of it. And when I say medication, specifically health supplements that are necessary for just maintaining a balance in my health. We go motel and hotel hopping. Everything's booked because of Coachella. Eventually, I find this motel that's honestly the place where people that want to do sexual stuff go for 2 hours, and it looked to be so. I sleep for about, I'd say, like barely for a few hours that night, wake up the next morning, and I essentially find out that I'm known now as like the 3rd potential Trump assassin, and the thing's blown up so immensely. And frankly, I see God's work in that. That's what was interesting, because as difficult as that was to comprehend, being a follower of Christ, walking in the footsteps of Christ, and being more aligned than I've ever been this last 2.5, 3 years, I realized there's a purpose to all of this. And that was actually really powerful to me, because after I had my breakfast, I remember standing in front of the motel and, like tears just streaming down my eyes, understanding like why this was happening. That was actually, and I'm sorry, I'm getting a little emotional, but I understand why I was put in that situation. I really do. And which is a powerful thing to, it's funny, I haven't gotten emotional in any of these interviews, but just thinking about that moment, I just felt very aligned. And it's interesting being on the path with Christ and seeing that sometimes these very difficult things happen to one, and there's miracle and purpose behind it. And I truly felt as though in that moment there was miracle and purpose behind it. So, I didn't fall apart emotionally. I understood why this was happening. I understood the challenge at hand. And, that's the bulk of that part of the story. And since then, it's really about getting him on as many shows as possible to set the record straight. And that in itself has been miraculous, because the way this thing happened was, when the first 2 shooters or potential assassins were news came out about him, it was like popping sounds. Trump ducked. Trump might have slipped, but for some reason with me, where there was like no evidence whatsoever, obviously, by the way, the Secret Service and federal officers declined to even interview me twice. A word came out from them that they did not see me as a threat, so it was very clear. But nonetheless, the way the headlines were all of a sudden, Vem Miller, potential assassin. I mean, that the coordinated nature of that and the abundance of it was something else, let me tell you. And I was shocked as to why they would go. Certainly, I realized what the fake news is, and I've realized what that is for a very long time. But being a victim to that, I mean, that was quite a experience, So yeah.
Yeah. Well, we got your business partner and friend, Mindy Robinson, on the show as fast as we could. We wanted to understand, like, okay, where's the breakdown in communication? Because this guy seems like a fan of Donald Trump, someone trying to get him elected, somebody that sees him as the vehicle for making America better, safer, healthier. What is this? And so we got her on, and she was able to clarify a lot in our 30-minute interview. What has happened since? You've mentioned a lawsuit. I know Sheriff Bianco had to, pull his foot out of his mouth and say, okay, I was given bad intel. There was never a threat on Trump's life. What has life been like the last couple of days?
I mean, it's been radically different. My clothes is still impounded in the car. I'm going to try to get it within the next 48 hours. So I had to go shopping for clothing. And I remember just walking through the aisles, people like looking down at their cell phones, looking at me, their eyes, and then, and I realized, wow, these people actually think that I'm some monster, a girl I was dating, broke up with me via text, and that is what it is. It's like, I don't know if we're getting married anytime soon. I got a call. Well, first, there was two things that happened with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department terrorism division. One was apparently 12 very heavily armed anti-terrorism unit officers without a warrant, without authorization from Sheriff McMahill, went to my parents' home. And apparently they were there for 2 days with flashlights and freaking my parents out. And obviously my parents are at home watching the news, and their sons all of a sudden being accused of all this stuff. And they're 83 and 77 years old. My dad's in very bad health. He's had literally 10 heart attacks, 3 strokes, diabetes, high cholesterol. And so this has apparently been going on for a whole day. And then the next day they come back. My mom calls my friend Steve Sanson, who runs a group called Veterans in Politics. Steve Sanson immediately rushes to the house. He's very fond of my parents. He knows my parents. And basically, he goes to the house and sees these 12 heavily armed officers on our private property. He tells them, what are you guys doing here? They tell him, they're here for a welfare check, which, by the way, apparently the neighbor had called, but then my mom called the neighbor, found out that the neighbor hadn't called. So there's definitely something a little fishy happening there, and I would dare to think that if I was there and I flinched, it's like I might be dead right now. That's my biggest worry, right? So Steve Sanson says, do you guys have a warrant? They say no. Steve Sanson, classic Steve Sanson styles, tells them to get the F out of here, And if you know Steve Sanson, you'll know why I'm laughing, because he's a very abrasive, not to mess with person who's actually put away judges, lawyers, corrupt political officials. I mean, he's known as somebody that once he finds out somebody's corrupt and doing bad by we the people, he goes after them with everything, billboards, articles, PR, you name it, These officers threatened to arrest Steve Sanson, which is a very bad idea because of obstruction of justice. He's like, what do you mean obstruction of justice? You guys are you're the one obstructing the law. You're here on private property without a warrant, with guns, freaking out old people. He's also friends with Kevin McMahill, Sheriff Kevin McMahill. He contacts him via text. He tells him what's going on. Sheriff Kevin McMahill says he's on holiday, I believe, and he had no idea this was happening. He apologizes. He says that the police are never going to come back, and he's going to launch an investigation into the matter. And so from this point, he actually takes my parents out to get a bite, makes a little video, posts it on social media where you can see my parents, just disturbed by, they had nightmares that night, and my dad did, and my mom didn't sleep at all. And so, good news though is they said that they apologized about doing all of that. And then the next day, I get a call from the head of the anti-terrorism unit, and this seems to be more official than what happened with the 12 officers there. And he tells me that he's genuinely concerned that because there's a lot of headline readers out there, that there might be like a Jack Ruby, Lee Harvey Oswald situation, which is probably not the most perfect analogy, but the idea being that somebody that's offended that I would try to cause harm to our president might then cause harm to me as a way of saving me from ever doing this again. And he says, I'm very worried, it's like, we would prefer you to be in our jurisdiction. We need to figure out a way of keeping you safe. And so, in all of this, it's like, I just realized that the life I'm looking at now is very different than it was before, including, going to events like I was supposed to be at Reawaken in North Carolina, Reawaken America, at, the Clay Clark events, which I've gone to probably 15 of them, you know what I mean, thus far. I usually don't miss them. And I realized, okay, this is probably a bad idea to start going each place. And I started thinking, do I need security? Do I need to move to a safe location, which is just or elsewhere where I won't have the risk of walking down the shopping aisle and somebody doing something bad, or even just a feeling of like people looking at me like this is, a POS that we're looking at, that tried to kill the president. Because unfortunately, we're pretty astute. You were saying, what's going on. There's a lot of people that don't know what's going on. There's a lot of people that are still messaging me and texting me, why did you try to kill the president? What the hell is wrong with you? Like saying negative things about me. I went through a divorce where, frankly, a lot of judicial corruption happened and court hearings happened without my attention, which honestly was one of the other reasons why I felt it's important to launch a company like America Happens, which is uncensored media and actually goes after judges that are corrupt and politicians that are corrupt, because certainly our mainstream media doesn't do it. Their legal departments are too scared to do it. And so a lot of that starts coming back. Things that my ex-wife said about me, which frankly have already been proven to be untrue. But since they're published in legal files that are available, people start sending that kind of stuff, to validate what the sheriff had said. So life's definitely very much changed, and it is what it is. But in all of this, I see the work of God in it. I see certain things that are going to really help this country, I think, ultimately, and I have some plans on how to utilize these changes in my life. Yeah.
Okay. One thing, I don't want to throw off any potential lawsuit you have against the sheriff's department or anyone else, but you had mentioned 4 theories, 1 or 2 of them maybe being a little bit conspiratorial. Can you just give us a flavor of what that is? Because when I spoke with your friend and business partner, Mindy, she said one of her first worries was, you've done these anti-government corruption documentaries, and maybe that this was revenge. What are those conspiracy theories that you're worried about?
Well, first, I just want to make a statement about anti-government, because this is something that the sheriff said as well. Like, I have nothing anti-government. And in fact, by virtue of me becoming involved in a lot of election cycles to help the preferred candidate, obviously I'm supporting a candidate that's running for government office. Without government, we have anarchy, and that's not something that I'm very much into. It's also not very biblical, because the biblical version of life is supposed to be biblical law, which is actually how our laws are set if you discount what's happened to it since then, which is the corruption that's come in because of things like the bar that are trying to really bastardize God's law and make it a place where people that commit victimless crimes or things become crimes, like having 4 extra bullets in your gun and, having that as being a reason to be persecuted. But the other thing I like to say is, the way I like to couch this is government is an inanimate object. So my target, and not capable of emotion, not capable of harm, not capable of anything as kind of capable of harm and badness as this cup right here. And so my target has been individuals within government that do bad things that harm we the people. That's the integral issue. And so literally 3 weeks before these events, I released a documentary called Bundy versus Deep State about the really horrible corruption that is happening by the federal government that sees lands in Nevada that are state lands, and using that as a way to steal the gold, silver, lithium, and other natural resources that should belong to the people of Nevada. Nevada has more natural resources, especially gold, than most parts of the world, almost as much as the entire mainland of China. So if Nevada was an independent country, it would be one of the wealthiest independent country by virtue of the natural resources that exist there. But federal government officials and elected politicians have used fraudulent methods to ship out our very valuable gold to places like China and Canada through things like deeming a piece of land to be sovereign Native American land because they can't directly do business with the Chinese. But if it's sovereign, that sovereign land could then do business with whoever they want, even if those are economic enemies or whatever, right? And then in the process of making this documentary, it starts with the Bundys. It starts with the Bundy Rand standoff, where Cliven Bundy is saying, you guys don't own this land, leave us alone. And the story behind that is in 1992, I think there was 53 or 54 ranchers in the region. The federal government forced all those ranchers to sign grazing rights contracts. And by virtue of signing these grazing rights contracts and the limitations within these contracts, every single rancher that signed it, and I'm talking about 53 potentially, out of 54 went bankrupt. They lost their ranch. Their lives were destroyed by going business with the federal government. At the same time, we're aware that in the early 90s, there was a clear-cut agenda by BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, to get rid of the American rancher, right? And you'd wonder why, because this is the best form of healthiest red meat one could get. Red meat is very good, especially for men and men's health. And people that go on carnivore diets, we see such results that are positive in their health. In fact, I saw a kid that was born very sickly. They thought he was going to die at 3 months old. As soon as the kid was old enough to actually eat red meat, that's what the mom started, put him on a carnivore diet. And this kid is like super kid now. Like he started talking, walking, everything happening faster because of that diet. Okay. But they wanted that gone. But Cliven Bundy says, I'm not signing your grazing rights contract. So what do? They start going after the man using violence by descending upon his land, killing his cattle, literally shooting and killing his cattle, saying that this is going to be another Waco, insinuating that we're all going to kill you unless you get the hell off this land. And he stands his ground. Next thing you know, 2,000 militia members show up to stand up to the federal government, and the federal government walks away. But they continue the persecution of the Bundys, and at this time, there's a man sitting in his home watching this all happen named Mike Little. And what Mike Little is just a brilliant mind and a brilliant entrepreneur. He starts researching the lands rights issues and finds out that the entirety of Clark County, which includes Las Vegas, has been built upon complete fraud, right? This means trillions of dollars worth of casinos and things that have been placed there, that the federal government has sold that land, is actually been sold fraudulently. And the implications of that is that it might knock out the entire federal government. It might knock out the entire Federal Reserve should this information ever be presented in court. So Mike Little spends 9 years building this massive lawsuit with other people involved. And he's going to file this lawsuit. And 2 days before he files, he falls deathly ill. And we think he's been poisoned. And within 5.5 weeks, he was dead. And there was other people involved in the case. So luckily, the case went forward. But this was, there's a lot of other gray areas or shades of gray, that are in this documentary that I highly recommend people watch. It's right up top at the featured section of americahappens.com. But and the lawsuit, by the way, is on the website as well, published on the website for people to read. We believe that this, greatest of patriots, Mike Little, and he knew, by the way, he was going to get killed. On 4 or 5 occasions while we're filming the documentary, he turns the camera and is like, I know they're going to kill me for this stuff, because he knew what he had discovered. And we filmed this documentary. We released this documentary. One of the blessings of this entire bizarre event is that this documentary now has 10 times the views, exposure that it ever did, because people were wondering, okay, let's go find out who this Vem Miller guy is. Oh, americahappens.com. Oh, this is the first thing on there, Bundy versus Deep State. So a lot of people have seen it. So it could be that documentary. The number two conspiracy idea in terms of, potentially pissing off very powerful people, and nobody knows this, and I can't tell you too much about this, but we got a tip having to do with the theft of 2024, which thus far is being investigated by more capable parties in terms of the next level of an investigation, but through whistleblowers, we at America Happens found out information that might lead to the entire system of how they have been planning to steal 2024. And there's at that point, I had that information to much more capable parties in terms of potentially going into dangerous situations, and that's all I can say about that topic. But I do know one of the individuals that's been involved early on told me, he's like, they're listening to all these conversations. They already know, and just be prepared. And then next thing I know, this event happened. So do I believe that any one of those is the reason? Definitely not. I don't want to jump to any theory.
So what I want to do, Vem, is I want to put a direct link down below to americahappens.com so that they can go check that out. From all of the conservatives that I follow on Twitter, I don't believe now that any of them believe you wished any harm on Trump. I'll bet you Trump doesn't believe you wished any harm on Trump.
Yeah.
You have connections and photos with some of the biggest names in the Republican Party, RFK Jr., others. So I'm hoping that this was a giant misunderstanding. I believe your name is going to get cleared. I believe this lawsuit is definitely going to go through and clear you. I'm so sorry that you've had to live through this. I appreciate you coming on and sharing your side of the story, because all of a sudden it was like you were the biggest name on the internet, and there, all these like fabricated stories, fake VIP tickets, illegal guns trying to be snuck in, and the reality is, like, you were trying to be a good citizen and let them know, hey, I've got these in the trunk. I have a Glock, just like Vice President Kamala Harris, but it's locked up. I'm going in, it's in the parking lot, and boom, your life becomes a nightmare.
Yeah, and it's sad because it's all about honesty is the best policy, operating in honor, which is a tenet of law, and this is where we've done a lot of episodes about law and what's happened with law, and the separation of the lineage of the Holy Bible, how that led to the Magna Carta, how that led to the U.S. Constitution, but then now there's a statutory law that's been added, which for somebody that's devoutly Christian, that's the layers of the devil to me. You know what I mean? That's the layers that are there not to help us, but to actually hurt us, make us an instrument for making a lot of money. If you don't mind, seems like we're close, we're wrapping it up, but I'd like to say, I think the purpose of all of this is, I went through a change. I was at one point a Democrat, and 2015 to 2018 was my arc of realizing the greatness of Donald Trump, frankly, and his policies and the people that support him. And I restarted the America Happens really for the purpose of helping us get to America 2.0, what I call America 2.0, which is essentially a restoration of our God-given rights, restoration of our freedoms, restoration of the powers of we the people, and restoration of state rights, which Bundy versus Deep State clearly shows. This federal government is out of control. Every state should be governed like a country, depending on what flavor that state wants to go. That's the freedom of we the people, right? In all of this, I started very vocally talking about fake news back in 2018, because I saw how the news was editing through a trick called Frankenbiting. People should look it up. It's when you Frankenstein footage to create lies, essentially, false realities. And so I've been very, very vocal in all of this. I've been telling everybody in Hollywood that I know through posts, through personal conversations, and frankly, they haven't liked my politics. But there's three things here I think that happened, which is I see the hand of God in, okay? All my friends in Hollywood, and as a ripple effect, their communities now see somebody they know that wasn't an assassin, and their life absolutely carpet bombed. So they cannot no longer deny fake news. And I actually believe that, these people are mostly in California, Nevada, New York. I don't think it's going to make a difference in an election because of the demographics and how California and New York usually go, unless something miraculous happens. Who knows? But I actually see these people now voting for President Donald Trump. So I do believe that's one upside. In terms of like the presence of God in all this, and I'm very hesitant, because I've heard people like George W. Bush say that God made him go to the Iraq War because of Mag or Gomeg or whatever, biblical thing, parallel he was trying to draw. So that sort of thing of like God, is making you do something has always been something that I kind of frown upon. I feel as though I'm just a vessel, and you know the thing that happened here is now, as a victim of the kind of fake news that Donald Trump has been going through for years and other individuals have been going through years, I feel like there's a mandate here to, especially when the president wins, to redefine the mainstream media. I think this is, and we can do it. It's all about funding. And in fact, I'm working on a bill with higher up in the Nevada Republican Party, where it's either SBA type loans, where opportunity zone type loans for companies like yourself, myself, all the different podcasters and up and coming networks to really give us the fuel to become the mainstream media, which I believe with the right framework could happen within, like a year. We're already like really unified, more powerful than them. But like this could be really the push that we need, because that stuff is all toxic. We saw that. That's like propaganda toxic. They could have almost got me killed. They might still get me killed. This, you see what I'm saying? It's pure evil what happened, and that needs to stop. So I do feel as though that's the, silver lining. That's the God's work that needs to be done, that to make this country better. So I do see that opportunity as a byproduct of all this stuff that just happened, all this crazy stuff that happened over the last 4 or 5 days.
Yeah. Well, I hate that you had to go through this, but I believe you're a strong person, and you're going to get through this. And I just want you to know, from the people I've talked to and follow, nobody thinks that you had ill intentions, or that. That's why I started with the way that I did. That you were falsely accused. This thing blew up and got out of hand, and I wanted to bring the truth to at least my pocket of the internet. Anyway, I'm going to put that direct link down below. I know you've got other interviews to get onto today. Mm-hmm. Keep going. Keep your head up. A lot of people are going to be wanting to send prayers and thoughts your way, and support America Happens. So thank you for that. And thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for having me on. I really, really appreciate this, brother.
Okay. Have a great day.
Thank you.